So by now, many folks have received their incredible new Tonex pedal from the fine folks over at IK Multimedia, and in today's video, I wanted to cover what I feel might just be one of the most important topics and the most important things to know about how to use Tonex pedal and also Tonex software. I'm going to show you today's topic within the software just because it's easier for me to actually have up on screen, but this all applies perfectly to the pedal, as the pedal is essentially just mirroring what the software is doing. You might wonder what I'm talking about. Well, we're going to dive into the actual controls that we have over the tone model after it's created. Now, some folks say we shouldn't touch it. Do not EQ it. Don't touch the bass and the treble and the middle control at all, because that's not the way that the tone model was captured. And I tend to disagree with that. There is not going to be any perfect tone model that's going to handle every situation. And yes, we could go surfing through a whole pile of different tone models. But if we have a tone model that is generally doing everything we want it to do, it has that vibe we want, but maybe it's just a touch too bright or a touch too dark, doesn't seem to be a really logical thing to do, to go searching through numerous other tone models when we could make maybe just the tiniest little tweak without compromising the overall vibe and feel of that tone model, but just tailoring it to our situation. The thing to remember is everybody's tastes are slightly different. Sometimes wildly different. Everybody's monitoring system is different. Everybody's guitar is different. Everybody's playing style is different. So no single individual tone model is just going to make everybody super happy. And it would be a shame to miss out on a really great tone model when we could just make a little tweak. So today I'm going to talk about what I feel are the two most important controls or parameters that we have on Tonex and Tonex pedal. And I hope that this helps some folks to be able to get even more out of their pedal and software. So without further ado, let's head on over to Cubase, where I have Tonex open within Cubase. All right, so here we are within Cubase. I'm going to also showcase today my brand new, just released, as of just a couple hours ago, my Brit 800 Ultimate set of tone models. This is kind of a stripped back 6-tone model set based off the Marshall Studio Classic JCM 800, but this time it's recorded through a 212 cab loaded with Celestion G12 T75 speakers. I actually really love these speakers for their smoothness, and you can get some really gorgeous tones out of them. These are all mic'd up with an incredible Bayer Dynamic M160 ribbon mic and recorded through a Cranbourne Audio Camden 500 mic preamp set just right, and I was just absolutely loving the tones here. Here is the 4th level of gain. You'll notice with all of my tone models, I will put numbers beside them, and that's just the level of gain, all the way from 1 being very clean, progressing up, a little more breakup, a little more gain. And finally, we have a lead preset. Really loving these tones, having a total blast. Later in the video, I'm going to play you an in the mix audio demo of utilizing these presets that I just showed you in a mix. And I think they came out sounding really, really cool. But for now, let's get to the topic of the video. So basically, we see here that we have the controls gain, bass, mid, treble, volume, reverb, compression, noise gate, presence, and depth. Today, we're going to be talking about the tone stack, essentially, the bass, middle, and treble, the volume, the gain, but most importantly, the presence and the depth, and I'll leave those till after. So let's talk a little bit about these controls here. This gain control, there's been a lot of confusion about it. Since I did a video talking about the global input trim, a lot of folks said, oh, I wish that wasn't a global feature. I wish I could just set input trim per preset. Well, you can. This gain knob is going to act as your input. So basically, if we roll this back, we're going to be hitting the front of the tone model with less input, kind of like rolling our guitar volume back. Right, if I take that and put it back to 5, but roll my guitar volume back. You'll see we get a very similar effect. So that is just going to be our input gain. So we crank that up, we're going to be hitting the front of this amp model with more gain. It'd be kind of equivalent to having just a hotter guitar going into it. Okay, so we'll leave that alone at 5. Now we have the volume control over here. This is not going to affect the tone or the saturation. This is just going to be the overall volume level of the preset. If you find that it's too quiet, we can crank this up. If you find that it's too loud, we can turn it down. Not going to affect our tone at all. You see, we still have the level of overdrive and distortion, just at a lower volume. There's the default setting of 5. So hopefully that clears that up. Now, we look at this bass, middle, and treble control as if it's a normal tone stack on a normal amplifier we would use. Well, we can think of it like that, but let's go into our advanced parameters, where we get to dive a little bit deeper under the hood. So our bass frequencies here, we can set the bass frequency between 75 hertz and 600 hertz. The thing to remember is this is a shelf EQ. So this is going to boost or lower all of the frequencies below whatever we set this to. So if we set this to 600 hertz and I take this all the way down, I've taken as a shelf EQ and lowered all of those frequencies below that. It really thins out the sound. Now, obviously, if I crank that, it really fills things out. So the default setting of the model is at 5. So it doesn't matter what we do to this when set at 5, because it's not actually adding or subtracting anything. So that's a shelf EQ. So I'm going to keep that up at 600. The mid frequency is a bell curve. So this is going to be just more like a normal parametric EQ, where we have a Q, or what's otherwise known kind of as a bandwidth. How many frequencies are going to be taken into account and how widespread this is going to make its boost or cut. So we could set this somewhere around 400, and if we wanted it to be extremely narrow, the number of frequencies, more of a notch filter, we could put the Q very high. You see, with the high Q, we don't really notice as much of a difference because it's pinpointing less frequencies more surgically, in a manner that if we had some sort of resonance that we didn't like and we knew what frequency it was at, we could set that Q very high like that and really notch that down. But if I take this same dramatic setting and take that Q all the way over to 0.2, now it's scooping out many more frequencies. So we got to be very careful with that. You can kind of see how powerful that is. Now it's pinpointing a specific frequency. So we have to keep in mind that this is like a parametric bell EQ, unlike the shelf EQ of the bass control. The treble control also is a shelf EQ. Again, I can control this from 1000 hertz all the way up to 4000 hertz. So let's bring that down to 1000, and we'll just be really dramatic about this. So we can see just how powerful these controls are. Now there is another control here, post and pre. So this is going to take this part of the EQ and either put it before the amp tone model or after the amp tone model. You might say, well, who cares? What's the difference? Well, it is very important, because thinking about this, if we were to come and make some gigantic boost like this, let's say, brighten things up, really kind of hitting those treble frequencies harder. If we put this before the amp, those frequencies are going to hit the amp harder. If we're dealing with a distorted tone like we are here, that is actually probably just going to saturate the amp more. And if we're already dealing with a really distorted tone, just compress it. So we may not even notice the increase in treble as much as maybe just more saturation. So let's listen to this set to pre, and then I'm going to switch it to post. You get a much more dramatic effect in post because what's happening is we're taking this distorted amp tone and then we're boosting the highs after. So it's not going into the amp model where it's just going to saturate anything more. If I put this in pre, it really affects things in a different way. We're going to find a more dramatic effect from it in post, and we're also not going to really mess with the tone of the tone model because we're not going to be hitting the front of it harder. So that's kind of something you're going to have to decide on your own. But again, I'm using dramatic settings here that I probably wouldn't use otherwise, other than just for demonstration purposes. But just keep that in mind. But these can be very powerful tools. Now, the problem with these are that we have to kind of know something about frequencies and what frequencies we want to manipulate, whether we want them pre or post. And that can kind of be a little tricky for some folks if they have never really dealt with EQ before. So they get a little scared of this and they maybe just shy away from touching it. Well, that's where what I feel the two most powerful controls are in Tonex and Tonex pedal, and that's the presence and the depth. Now, as far as I know, I don't have any official word on this, but I don't think the pre and post actually affect presence and depth, and I'll show you why. Let's show you first what these do. Presence is just basically going to control our high frequency content. Depth is going to be more around the low frequency content. A lot of times in real life amps, these are part of the power amp section, which would make sense in here because of the whole pre-post thing as well. So watch what I'll do. I'll do something pretty dramatic. I'm going to crank the presence up. I'm going to bring the depth way back. And you can hear very clearly the difference that makes, but watch what happens when I go pre and post. I don't hear it making any difference, so I'm thinking, like I said, that these are actually happening after the amp all the time, which is actually really great because we can manipulate these without worrying about adding more overdrive or distortion or saturation into our tone model. Now, you might say, well, why are these the two most powerful features? Let's say that we loaded up a tone model, such as the one I'm playing right now from this Brit 800 Ultimate tone model bundle that I have available on my website. And let's say through our monitoring system, it was a little too dark. I don't know, or too bright, whatever. Let's say it was too dark. Without worrying about what frequencies we should and shouldn't mess with here, we can simply come up over to the depth and maybe pull it back a little bit. You can hear what that does. Now that's obviously very extreme. Let's say we wanted more kind of beef and weight to it. Let's go the opposite way. Obviously way too much, but if we were here up at 5, we could really alter things in a very subtle but meaningful way. Now, we could take that and say, I also want to add just a little more bite to my top end. Now, a little really does go a long way here. We could make very subtle moves here. and have something that's just dialed in and sculpted to exactly how we want that to sound. And I really think that this works quite nicely. So this here, presence and depth, we don't have to worry about it hitting the front of the tone model and altering the sound of the tone model, but we can have a lot of really powerful control over the low and high frequency content in a way that's very usable. Now, if we do have our EQ set to post, another thing I like to do is set my bass frequency shelf up to about 600, my treble frequency down to 1000. And this is another way, because of it being a shelf EQ at those extremes, we can also utilize these controls, just the shelf EQ with those settings. And I could maybe pull out a little bit of bottom and add a little bit of top like so. And have a very similar effect to the depth and presence. But it's really going to be dependent on our personal ideals and preferences, our monitoring system, our guitars, and what it is we're trying to accomplish. So I would say for folks who think that these should never be touched, I think you're actually really missing out on very powerful features within your Tonex software and Tonex pedal that could save you a lot of time. That if you are on an amp model that you really, really like and really enjoy, that it would be a real wise thing to do to mess around with these, just to tune them in absolutely perfect for whatever scenario you're using them in. And maybe you're going to use them in different scenarios where those settings are going to be slightly different for each of those different situations. All right, so I hope you guys found that helpful and useful, and I hope that it was a little tip that can help you get things dialed in a little better on your own. Now, let's go over and listen to these new Brit 800 Ultimate Tone models that I've just put up on my website, available at the link below if you're so inclined to go grab these if you liked what you heard. And let's listen to how these sounded and worked in a mix when utilized together. All right, so what did you guys think? I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun to put together that tone model bundle. Like I mentioned already, the link is below in the description if you're so inclined to go pick it up and want to help support my channel a little bit. It's always greatly appreciated, and I thank you in advance for that. So I hope that those tips were helpful for some folks. I hope that that helps you get a little bit more out of your Tonex pedal and software. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and sharing your time with me. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.